So, hi everybody. My name is Sarah Finch Jackson, and I am the Twice Exceptional Instructional Specialist for MCPS. And that is a huge mouthful, but what it means is my primary role in MCPS is to work with all school-based staff, all non-school-based staff, and parents and communities to support our Twice Exceptional learners. One thing I like to do real quick, and this is a bigger class than I've had in a little while, but I'm super excited. I have a rule that I never say no to anybody who wants to take my class. So like I said earlier, we have 87 people signed up. I know a couple aren't going to be able to make it tonight. But because of that, it might be a little challenging sometimes. If we do want to do any small group discussions, I go back and forth between breakout rooms, and really I'll ask for feedback from you guys because some sessions have wanted to do some breakout rooms and chat and other sessions do not. So I'm happy to hear from you guys around that. Just take you through some housekeeping and logistics to begin. Firstly, you notice I said we are recording this. I record all of my sessions. I have to tell you that you can't miss more than one session and still get credit for the course. However, I do allow makeup sessions. So what I ask is that you just come back and watch the video to get caught up on anything you missed if you have to miss a class. On the attendance sheet, you will see that you have an option for, are you making up a class? And if you are, to tell me which class it is that you're making up. That is something they are very particular about when I submit my final paperwork. The other thing to know is the class is set to run through July. The class is set to run through April 29th. Our last class together officially is April 15th. I'm keeping it open the extra time so that people have time to finish any of the work associated with the course. But I will submit the grades before the end of the school year. And so if you are up against the June 30th deadline, you will get your credit for that. I will also share, because I hear it coming in the door right now, my daughter's getting home from swim class now, so I'm very sure you're going to meet her probably in about 30 seconds. I will do my best to keep her and my nephews out of here, but this is Monday nights in my house. And when you have twice exceptional children and a twice exceptional husband, and you yourself are twice exceptional, you get to live a very twice exceptional life, which is not always the most organized and emotionally regulated. We're going to do our best. So let's see, with that other housekeeping. So hopefully everybody has been able to see the course. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see. Yeah, let's just go ahead and share the whole screen. So hopefully you guys somewhere on your course have this nice orange tile recognizing and serving twice exceptional learners. The home tile still says summer. I'll fix that. I'm a little behind in fixing things, but you'll know you're in the right course if it's orange. If it's yellow, you are somehow in my summer class. So you definitely want to make sure you have the orange class. And you will see all the module buttons have the wrong dates on them. That's okay. The content is the same, even if the dates are wonkified. This link here should take you to this course. And hopefully, since everybody got here, if not, if there was an issue, just let me know. But I'm pretty sure I got that fixed. And then the other thing I have on here is my office hours time. So for those of you who have worked with me before, you know I use a lot of links when it comes to booking time to meet with me. This link is open, and it should be open for more hours because you're in my class. I'm free to meet with you guys more in the evenings if needed. And it will also put on my calendar that you're meeting with me for class and not a student, so that will help organize my life. So if you do have questions, you want to talk to me about anything related to the class, please use that link. Overall, with my modules, does the final assignment button work? Oh, good, the final assignment button works. If you do find things that don't work, please let me know. I've been doing this for a number of years, but always there's something broken. I just don't know what it is until someone tells me. You are free to move through the modules at any pace that you want. I'm not particular. You don't have to have it done before you come to class. The only difference really is if you're somebody who wants to front load information and see what's going on, or if you're somebody who wants to listen and then kind of backfill what it is you think you're missing. When we get into some of the later modules. I actually have redone module 5 and 6, so it's not split so clearly between elementary and secondary, but all the information is there. It's just going to be in a slightly different order. So if you do decide to move ahead, you're not going to do anything wrong. You're not going to miss anything. It's just not as organized in those two sections as I like, but that was some feedback from my previous class. One thing I will share also is that in the course description, it said something about doing a case study. I called it a case study because when I was writing the application for this, I had to call it something. But truly what I like to do is work with each of you, and I will give you parameters as we go on doing something in your life that works for whatever. If you are a psychologist, I usually will have you guys, if you find a kid who you think might be twice exceptional, or you want to talk through a kid who is twice exceptional and like do a deep dive into one of the reports, I do that. If you are a classroom teacher, I have a couple of things where we can like talk about how we can tweak the lens on how you're looking at different lesson plans to support your twice exceptional students. Really, I try and tailor things for what it will make sense for your classroom. I promise that will make more sense as we go along, but I really don't want to give you any extra busy work. And everything I do, if you have a question that comes as like, this doesn't really make sense for my job, but this makes more sense, that's usually perfectly fine. I want it to be meaningful to you. We have twice exceptional learners in all of our classrooms everywhere across the county. Officially, we say we have about 4,000 of them, but we know that twice exceptional learners are one of our most underrepresented populations. And so there's a lot of times that you will find twice exceptional students who have no code, who have no label, but what they will benefit from is you understanding the best practices on how to support them. So that is one of the reasons, like I said, why this class is always open, and I want as many people to learn as we can so that we can support our students. If anybody's having issues with having that tile in Canvas show up in your course list or anything like that, go ahead and drop me an email and I will play tech support tomorrow. Despite some of my apparent skills, I actually am pretty good with Canvas. I just need to kind of go back in and sometimes figure some things out for people. So if you are having that issue, let me know, but you are not behind for anything today. And so with that, I will, unless anybody has any questions before we get started, I will go ahead and start our class for the evening. Cool. So the first thing I actually would like to do is ask you guys to kind of pop in the chat, just so I have an idea of who we are talking to tonight. If you can just tell me what your position is, and if you took this class because you're excited about the topic, because you needed 3 credits, and so you decided to come along for the ride because you thought it sounded interesting, but you have no idea what we're doing. I just wanted to kind of get an idea of where we're starting tonight. So if you want to pop that in the chat, that would be awesome. Be really excited when I see the ELC teachers, because that means that they heard me speak and still wanted to hear me speak more. Excellent. We've got a really wide swath of folks here. Wonderful. We'll keep those rolling in. I am so excited that you guys are here. And so where I want to get started with this really is to talk about some definitions of our twice exceptional students. And I actually am going to pull us right off of our, right off of the first page. I don't typically, okay, there we go. I don't typically just roll right through what's already on the Canvas course, but I do like to do this to really frame out, wow, I left everything as July. It's not July, it's February. But I really do like to go ahead and go through what our specific definitions are, because I think it's really important to start with a definition of our students, specifically because it is very hard to define who our kids are. So on here, I have us, a lot of clicks on here, don't I? There we go. So I really want to start first with the Scott Berry Kaufman definition from 2020. To me, this is one of the most comprehensive but short definitions we have. In some of the readings I have one definition from Susan Baum that I really like, but it's 4 pages long. I need short and sweet sometimes. And so I really like this definition because it really touches on many, many aspects of our twice exceptional students. So we know that twice exceptional individuals are students who have capacity, competence, creativity in multiple domains in a gifted level, but they also are coupled with one or more learning difficulties. And those learning difficulties don't have to be academic, they could be social, they can be social emotional. It's a very wide range that we look at when we're talking about our learning disability or learning difficulties. What we end up with is not just students who have some highs and lows, but students who really, because of this combination, end up with a very unique circumstance. Um, and in that unique circumstance, we get a feature we call masking. Masking is when either the exceptionality will dominate and hide the disability so that the student never really has the disability sorted or supported. They might hide the giftedness, so we see the student's disability, but we struggle to see where some of their gifts are, which can lead to lots of social emotional issues, frustration, and has a lot of negative long-term effects. And then the third group that we end up with are the kids who are double masked. And these are our students who have high highs and low lows, but yet when we look at them, everything comes out as average. And so they're never properly challenged, but they're also never properly supported. Um, again, I like this definition because it really kind of encapsulates the high, the low, and the problem by having those two put together. It also really tells us, specifically, it's not so much about where the student is performing, it's more about how we approach teaching them and how we support the identification of these students, that we know that we are dual focusing so that we are addressing both their strengths and their weaknesses simultaneously, and that we also, in looking at these strengths and weaknesses, that we also provide opportunities for support on either end. The other definition I really want to talk about is the official MCPS definition, which I'm working on. Our MCPS definition is twice exceptional 2E students are students who are identified as gifted and talented and have also met the criteria for an IEP or a 504 plan. This definition works because these are the students who receive some type of support through the system, some type of, I don't want to say a formal recognition, but they're the ones who are usually most clearly labeled. What this doesn't do, that Scott's definition does do, is that it limits us under our understanding of twice exceptional to students who have support plans. And as I said earlier, twice exceptional students are some of the most under-identified, underrepresented students when we talk about different types of student groups and student labels. When we get into our equity portion and we talk about what we call thrice exceptional, which are students who are twice exceptional and also are either culturally, linguistically diverse, students who are, that just ran out of my brain, but I will get back to that. But those students particularly are even more significantly underrepresented, not only globally, but within the world of twice exceptional as well. So I don't love our MCPS definition. And part of what we are actually doing is working on rewriting and updating our twice exceptional handbook. It has been wonderful. There was something that was actually published a couple weeks ago, which still cites us. We are still some of the leaders in the country when it comes to twice exceptional education, support, recognition, and identification. But even that, we still know that we're a little bit behind. And so we are working on getting some of these pieces updated. So some of what we want to talk about tonight also is, why do we talk about twice exceptional? Like, why is it important? I've given you guys those official definitions, but why do we work so hard to identify these students in this part of our population. And truly, part of it actually comes from COMAR. So COMAR is our state regulation, and we updated it in 2019. And part of our charge in COMAR when we identify students who are gifted is to identify twice exceptional students and to ensure that those students are identified and supported within our systems. It's interesting because not a lot of states actually formally put twice exceptional as a recognition. And it's important to know that twice exceptional is not something that is defined in terms of disability or in terms of disability coding. So when we're talking about IEPs and 504s, those are disability focused. We can talk about a student having a twice exceptional profile, but what we don't really have is the saying this, what we don't really have is we don't say a student has an IEP because they're twice exceptional. It's rather that they have a disability that is also then mitigated somewhat by where their giftedness is. I think it's also important that we remember that when we talk about giftedness, there are people who are still struggling, and I like to describe it in terms of a bell curve. When we talk about students with disabilities, we are very comfortable about talking about students who are on grade level, below grade level, significantly below grade level. But what we often struggle with is the other side of the bell curve, and understanding that just because a student is on that end of the bell curve, it doesn't necessarily mean things are easier for them. It means that their learning needs are very different. And so just like we support our students who are on one side of the bell curve, we need to provide that support for our students who are on the other end as well. And then what we also end up with, again, are our twice exceptional students who have scores on both ends of the bell curve. Just as an example, actually today I was given a report to look at real quick where the student has a verbal subtest score that is in the less than first percentile, and they have a fluid reasoning score that's in the 99.8 percentile. That is a huge discrepancy. And that are just the two scores that stood out to me. There's a lot more scoring to it. But these students are in our classrooms, and this particular student is, I believe, in third grade right now. So the student has, since kindergarten, had no recognition of either end of their specific needs. And yet that is such an extreme difference in strengths and weaknesses. And so a big part of learning about twice exceptional is understanding where students fall across the spectrum, across the bell curve, and the types of supports that we need to provide both to our gifted learners as well as to our special needs learners, and then also our learners who are on both ends. I'm going to take a quick, I usually take a drink of water. My water did not make it upstairs with me. So I'm going to take a quick pause and clear my throat. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to throw them in chat or ask them. And just give me 1 second. So we have a question in the chat. How do we know if we already have identified twice exceptional students on our class rosters? It is not on the roster. And that's where the MCPS definition can be helpful. If your student is flagged as GT and they're also flagged as having a 504 or an IEP, then that would be a potential indicator that they are twice exceptional. One thing that is very different in MCPS right now is that we don't really use cognitive testing to identify giftedness. That in theory will be changing this year, but because of that, it doesn't always give us the clearest definition based on that previous definition that we had. One way that you guys would mostly know is if you are told by a student's case manager that they're twice exceptional. Generally, if a parent tells you, they're probably pretty accurate on that. Part of being twice exceptional, and I guess I didn't throw this in earlier, but I did say very, very early on when everyone was coming on, I am twice exceptional. My husband is twice exceptional. I have a meeting on Wednesday to find out if my daughter is twice exceptional. She is. So, because of that, there's a lot of pieces that I identify and I share parts of my story, because one thing that's important to know with twice exceptional learners, like really anybody with disabilities or abilities, is that we tend to focus a lot on the labels while we're in school, because that's how we move through our system, right? Everything is based on labels. But when you have these abilities and disabilities, they stay with you for your life. Things that affected me when I was in elementary school still affect me today. I might be able to mask them better or mitigate them better or support them better, but I still have the same self-regulation issues I always did. I still have the same time blindness I always have. Any of you who have ever waited for an email from me know this for sure. Um, I mean really well. I don't do the best on staying on top of those things. Those are some of my big areas of weakness. Um, but that's why for me, a lot of my work is very, very personal because it's something that I grew up with that wasn't very well understood. Um, Actually, I have an essay I actually had published about why I do what I do and reflecting on what it was like to grow up twice exceptional without anyone really understanding what twice exceptional meant. And I will probably read that after our break. By the by, I don't do well sitting for 2 solid hours. We take breaks in this class, and we also self-break in this class. I am not offended if you hit pause or whatever and you need to go to the bathroom or do 10 jumping jacks. You do you. I won't do 10 jumping jacks on camera, but if we do need to take an extra break or anything, just go ahead and let me know. But otherwise, I usually will try and break us either 10 minutes before or on the hour, and then we take a 10-minute break because I need 10 minutes not to talk to people. So as we're going through these, it is sometimes difficult to know, but I guess what I was trying to say was Twice Exceptional, especially, is very much a community, and it's part when you identify as Twice Exceptional, for the most part, it's a part of your community, it's part of your personality, it's a part of like the who of who you are. One of the best things about learning about the label of Twice Exceptional was learning that there were other people out there like me. Even into my 30s, I did not know what Twice Exceptional was. And when I met this world of Twice Exceptional people, it was suddenly like, oh, like I'm not by myself out here. Now, ironically, since then, my adult friend group, it's like dominoes. They're all slowly being diagnosed, mostly with ADHD. And I'm like, you've been my friend for more than 10 years. If you can stand me for 10 years, you probably have something going on. But it really is like we are our own community, and now all of our kids are falling down that rabbit hole. Twice exceptional people, whether or not they mean to, tend to band together. It is part of the philosophy of some of the programs that we have in our county, is that our twice exceptional kids need to be with twice exceptional peers in order to better understand themselves and in order to thrive. So will you have it on a roster? No. Are there ways that we have it written into IEPs and 504s? Yes. Um, but it's also possible to have a twice exceptional kid who doesn't have an IEP or a 504, but the parents might tell you they're twice exceptional. If they are, it will probably come up in conversation. And that's again why it's a good idea to have an understanding that about our kids and the fact that they exist. Let's see. I saw a couple other questions I wanted to grab on here. So yeah, so I can frame that a little bit differently as well. So they are our students, when we just say that they're gifted in one area or one or more areas. Within MCPS, we define students as gifted. We don't define a specific area of giftedness. In the world of Twice Exceptional, gifted is a very broad term. It doesn't always mean academically gifted. Students can be gifted in creativity and leadership, in arts and performance. There's a myriad of ways that students can be identified as gifted. Our gifted students tend to have a series of common characteristics that have to do with aptitude, ability, moving beyond what their same age peers will do. But it doesn't have to be like super narrow, and it doesn't have to be across all domains. It's actually very rare to have somebody who is gifted in many, many domains. And then when we're talking about the special education, the special needs piece, it's a very, very broad definition. I actually am talking to some psychologists out in, I want to say Indiana. I think it's at Purdue. Um, some of the academics move from program to program, and I can't keep track of where they are right now. But I do have some friends who are psychologists who are specifically studying twice exceptionality in children who do not have ADHD and autism, because obviously our neurodiverse, our neurospicy friends, get a lot of attention in the world, they tend to need more attention. They tend to call attention to themselves a little bit more. But my friends are focusing on more sensory processing issues. They're focusing on deaf and hard of hearing or blindness and giftedness. And there's a whole world out there. So um, it's why it's kind of hard to use the definition of only having a special education need, but really that idea that there's a learning difficulty, there's a learning difference, there's something that is a barrier or impeding the person's success. But then they also have the giftedness on the other side, which can compound the issue. So I hope that gives a little bit different of a perspective on there. I will also talk, by the way, about we will have guest speakers. You do not have to listen to me all week, every week for the next 100,000 weeks. I don't remember how many we're doing, but I will be bringing in some guest speakers. I'm actually really excited. You guys are getting a brand new person this year. She specializes in early childhood and primary talent development, but she will talk about talent development in general, but I'm really excited to have her come speak. I just met her at conferences last year, and that was super exciting. We do have a conference coming up for teachers that I will be posting information about. That it does happen during the workday, but the sessions are available for, I think, 6 months after the conference happens that you can watch at any time. There's some other opportunities that are coming up. And then I always say, if the only session you're interested in is mine, I'm perfectly happy to give you my sessions for free. You don't have to go to conference. But I also try and incorporate some of what I talk about in my sessions into my class so that you guys will get that information and feedback. So I'm just listening to the chaos downstairs. Having my nephews here while I'm teaching is a new experience that we are going to have every week because Monday is swim day. All right, so I know some people like that phrase of like when you've met one something, you've met one something. True for Twice Exceptional the way it is for everybody else. But there are some commonalities when we talk about our students. So some of the primary commonalities when we talk about our students who are Twice Exceptional is they do tend to be more verbal learners, not necessarily writers. In fact, writing, especially for Twice Exceptional, tends to be an area of impact, whether it's the executive functioning that is impacting their ability to write or just their ability to focus on the paper long enough to care to put any answers down. Writing is not a strength, but verbal reasoning and thinking, vocabulary, arguing, talking through anything they want to talk through, those tend to be significant strengths for our students. They tend to be very hands-on, so whether it's the artistic creative or the destroyers, like not unusual. You've got the kids who will build beautiful things, and then you've got the kids who will take it down apart to like the itty bitty little pieces, and you have, you know, in the old days, your VCR everywhere on, but where it's supposed to be. Being able to put their hands on things and to be able to reason their way through those relationships of how materials interact and work with each other. Our children tend to be very creative problem solvers. That said, they're not great at the problem solving process, especially if other people are involved. But the idea of solving a problem, big problems, global problems, those are things that tend to really drive our students. Again, not for a lot of our students, but just that background and content knowledge. When our kids get really into something, they get really into something. And sometimes that's actually a really great thing, because if you can draw something that is not of interest into something that is of interest, you can sometimes get a little bit more buy-in. But because they have that background knowledge, they're also really good at making some of those connections. And that's where some of that reasoning and problem solving comes in, is using that background knowledge to make creative connections. Conceptual learning. Again, our students aren't necessarily the best at putting down concrete thoughts, but if you're trying to bring together some really big ideas, or sometimes they try and bring together really big ideas that actually don't fit together very well, it's those big concepts that really speak to them. And then the curiosity piece. They want to know a lot of things. They will ask 1,001 questions. They will be in 10th or 11th grade, and sometimes it still feels like you're talking to a toddler who's like, why? They want to know. And then common challenges. So not quite universally, but fairly universally, processing speed and working memory are areas of impact. And what's really interesting with our twice exceptional kids is you'll see working memory and processing speed in really kind of two categories of impact, if it's an impact. Category one is where our student has more of what we would call a relative deficit, meaning that their processing speed and working memory is actually in the average range, but because their other skills are so high up off the charts that for them it's a deficit. So again, that student who, well, okay, so the student who was in the first percentile isn't the best, but I actually had yet another report today where the students verbal comprehension and fluid reasoning and those types of skills were in the 130, 140 range, and the processing speed was about a 98. And the working memory was, I want to say, a 96. Both of those are in the average range. But when you consider how far away the other scores are from that average range, it becomes a relative deficit for that child. So they have all these big ideas and concepts, but their processing speed and working memory is not keeping up with those abilities. On the flip side of that, we have the actual deficit. And that is, again, like the other child that I spoke of, where the fluid reasoning especially was in the 120 something range. It was a 99th percentile, but then the processing speed and the verbal were all in the first, second, fifth percentile. So it is an actual deficit. I mean, that particular child, I think we are talking almost 4 standard deviations difference between their high scores and their low scores. So as you can imagine, it's kind of like, on the one hand, part of their brain is on a gas pedal and they are just pushing it to the floor. But on the other hand, they're standing on the brakes too. And so we know in a car, that's going to drop your transmission real fast. In a kid, that's going to look very different, often with behaviors, frustration, acting out. And we will get into that more when we talk about the social emotional characteristics of our students. But that's kind of where that root cause is coming from, is that there's such a difference between their strengths and weaknesses that it's really hard to reconcile them, especially when they're younger. Other areas that we find, and we'll talk a lot more about executive functioning. Executive functioning is more than just organizing our things. It's really about organizing our lives. It's about self-regulation. It's problem solving, interacting with others. Depending on who you're reading, it's between 11 and 14 different areas. But it's really like that kind of master control center of where your brain is, and being able to goal set, prioritize, follow through, manage time. All of that falls under executive functioning. And if our students don't actually have a deficit or disability in executive functioning, they're still often very much impacted in that area. And then we also know ADHD and autism heavily impact areas of executive functioning, which also then brings us to the written expression piece. Our students, some of them love to write. Some of them love to write what they want to write and nothing else. And some of them, just the idea of getting all of those thoughts, and this is where, the thinking goes so fast, they can't slow themselves down long enough to put it on paper, whether they're writing or typing. I know one of the things we talk about a lot is voice to text as a way, or speech to text as a way to help our students. I know I think and talk so fast that speech to text can't keep up with me. And so it ends up in a worse garble than it was in my brain. So there's pieces that we do, but written expression often becomes a challenge for our students. Basic reading and calculation is very interesting. Again, our kids usually are pretty high concept, and then just those following the steps or the individual calculation pieces, those two together tend to be more of our GTLD learners, or our GT learners who have a specific learning disability, whereas written expression is not always about a specific learning disability because it can affect all of those other pieces as well. So you can have issues in written expression without having a specific learning disability. Generally, the reading calculation skills are going to be associated with that specific learning disability. We talked about attention, self-regulation. Social skills can be really interesting with our kids. It's often not that they need um, to necessarily be taught the rules of social interactions, and often they can actually teach the class on that. Um, their issue is always like that application piece. Like I will often say to parents, and they frequently will agree with me, I don't have to teach your child how to talk to other people. I need to teach your child how to listen to somebody else and accept that somebody else might be right. Um, I actually just wrote a goal recently for a kid who they need to acknowledge what the other person says. And then if they agree, they have to incorporate what that person says into their own thinking. And for our kids, it's a real challenge because it's hard for them, you know, if you disagree with them or say something slightly different than they do, they're very held on to what their ideas are. And then also because they're very focused on and excited often about their learning, getting them to not talk at you, but talk with you and have interactions with each other can be a really difficult task. And so when we talk about that social skills application, we're really talking about their ability to to listen and process and then reciprocate, but not necessarily so much on the rules and expectations of social interaction that we might have with some other students. We talked about masking. Um, so this is something I also kind of like to start us with or talk about in the beginning. I used to do this later in my presentations. But what I really like are these are actual quotes from students. And I think one of the pieces that's important is our students are they're often, even if they can't put words to it, they are smart enough to know what it is they struggle with, even if they're not great about advocating for it or telling you those are where their issues are. And so we asked students to share with them some of the things that were difficult for them in the classroom. So um, what I like to give you guys this moment, just kind of read what they say. I'm going to stop talking. And then the other piece is we pulled this from distance learning, but I kept it because especially when we're using Canvas, a lot of these kind of more came out from Canvas. Um, the struggles that they were having with some of the pieces that we think we're putting in there to be supportive, and they're not particularly supportive to the kids. Um, and there's still things that there's a couple of things on here that I've dealt with as recently as this week and explaining like a kid can have extended time, but if you don't actually change that setting on your Canvas course, they don't really get their extended time. Um, so like I said, that's why I've kind of kept these pieces in here to hear from our students. So, so I take a breath and try to get a gauge on how you guys are feeling right now. If you want me to keep just lecturing at you, if you want to have like a breakout room break to kind of talk through what you're hearing. All right. It weirds me out when people are like, keep talking. I'm like, no, never in my life. Like, I want to snap this and send it to my mother. If people want to hear me. So that's a great question. How is all of this going to be applied? So some of this is going to be applied, and I feel like I'm taking the thunder from another presentation, but one of the ways that it is actually applied is knowing, okay, there we go. We know from research into gifted and twice exceptional students that just having knowledge of who they are and what their needs are has positive outcomes on their on their experiences, on their education and academic experiences. So some of the way that you are going to apply this is just by being here. And what I think you're also going to, yeah, I agree with that one. Some of the ways that you're going to apply this are going to be very, very subtle. A kid's going to say something and it's going to resonate with you in that moment. It's one of the reasons why for the class, I only want you guys to do work that makes sense for your classroom. And I don't do things like quizzes. I like having my discussion boards because I like that you guys get to talk to each other and process through some of these ideas online. And I also have to give grades at some point in time. I'm not a big grades person. Um, I genuinely believe that just like with our students, twice exceptional kids will get out of school what they put into school. There is not a whole lot we can do other than make the experience a positive one for them. If they're not feeling school, they're not going to learn anything. And if they're feeling school, even if what they're learning is stuff they kind of already know, they're more receptive to listening, to interacting, to being a part of their learning process. And I teach my class very much the same way. It's actually interesting. I read recently, and by the way, for me, recently can be anywhere from yesterday to 6 months ago. So take my recently with a grain of salt. But I did read recently that one thing with people with ADHD is that they tend to think big to small, meaning if you can't tell me the why of why I need to do this, I'm not going to bother to learn the nitty gritty of why I got to do this. Other people tend to work small to big. Teach me the skills, and when I know the skills, then I will apply them. Because of the way that gifted and specifically gifted kids with ADHD function, they're not going to learn a skill unless they know how it's going to be applied. I actually figured out after hearing this that I also teach my classes very much the same way. I start with the big picture, like this is why all this is important, and then I break this down into some of the more nitty gritty skills. And so that's why we start with our characteristics and our definitions and story time to start in the beginning, because as we go through the weeks and we start talking, like, let's go more in depth about what is the social emotional need? What does this look like? How is this different? Why do we need to know all these different elements of executive functioning? Because to me, those are the skills, but you're not probably going to listen to them unless you know the overall why and like who the kids are that we're yeah, isn't it amazing? And I think back to how I was in the classroom too. And I think because I was much more successful as a special ed teacher because so many of my kids were very much like me. And so I wasn't going to teach them things I didn't find useful, but I needed to make it useful to them. And when I tried the other direction, we all got confused and then none of us wanted to do anything. Um, so yeah, it is interesting when you start to learn more about some of these topics and areas because you start to see it in yourself and how you approach life in general. And it's one of the reasons that I love to keep learning and talking about all these different areas. I gave you guys that part to do. So one of the listenings that I want, that was horrible. I do like to speak English properly sometimes. Um, so one of the things I have you guys do a lot in here, I very much believe in choice. So anytime you get one of my playlists and it's like 17 different things, pick two, maybe three if you're really into it. Um, if you are my special friends who start to listen to one podcast and then you go down the rabbit hole, do not feel like you have to go back out and like then actually do things on the playlists. Most things when I put them up there are pretty related to each other. Every so often, there's one thing I will tell you that you need to do. The Case for Dual Differential Diagnosis is one of those podcasts out of the Neurodiversity podcast. I love the Neurodiversity podcast. Emily Kreischer Morris runs it. A lot of the text and the information I do with my case managers, we use her book, her latest book, as one of our focus points for that. But what I really, really like about that particular podcast is most of the guests are twice exceptional. Emily is twice exceptional. It's not all focused just on giftedness, but there is a lot of twice exceptionality and giftedness in there. But it's never a bad time to go down the Emily rabbit hole. Specifically though, with this particular episode on the case for dual diagnosis. And if you guys are counselors or psychologists, you really, really want to listen to that one. And please understand, when she says you should test for absolutely everything, she means it theoretically, not actually. And I'm never saying you should do every test for every kid all of the time. I'm not that person. Um, but I think conceptually, it's a really interesting thing to listen to. And for me, it's because it actually has that same kind of top, like broad to narrow approach. Um, when we think about who our twice exceptional kids are, like I said, I think our neurodiverse kids get a lot of attention, partially because they ask for a lot of attention, both in positive and negative ways. But one thing I really like in this particular discussion is this idea that we often will find what it is that we're looking for. You know, if we come to a meeting and we say we're coming in to look at a particular kid because we think there's a particular issue, and then we test for that issue, we're probably going to find that issue. But if we use the approach that they're talking about here, which is this idea of actually not looking at labels, but rather looking at the kid holistically, um, and figuring out what it is that specifically works for a student, the labels become less important because we start looking at the best practices instead. And I think one of the things that I will really talk us through throughout this is the universal design to learning. And some of you, most of you probably have at least heard it before. It is one of the foundations of my teaching beliefs in the universal design for learning, because to me, it's about, like I said, it's not about grades, it's about learning. And I very much want to have us think about when we come into any learning situation, we can't always know who our kids are. They're not always going to have those nice, neat little labels on them. But if we think about who our most needy students in our classroom are, and needy does not necessarily mean disability, it means that they have needs. And we plan for those needs first, and then we adjust accordingly on our way up. What we're going to be able to do is meet the needs of the majority of our students by our generalized approach. And then the tweaks that we need to make are very specialized and specific for students who have more rare or more specific needs. Um, and when we talk through that differential diagnosis case, she will walk you through that, especially, like I said, if you're a social worker, psychologist, or school counselor, she'll walk you through that in a more conceptual and less academic way than I tend to do in the classrooms. Um, I lost my checklist. So I'm going to do one quick. I'm also going to introduce you to my 16-year-old cat, Bella. She has an attitude problem, and when she comes to visit, you will see her tail back and forth. I apologize. She's 16. I can't fix it. Um, but she's here to join us as well. So, so last thing I want to touch on a little bit before we take our break is on some of the legal why of what we do. So I did talk about COMAR, which is our state legislation. Um, we've touched a little bit on, and we know IEPs and 504s are legally mandated. We have to do them. But in more recent years, there have been more Supreme Court decisions around education and special education. And one of the big cases that came out in 2017 is the Andrew F. decision. And on the course, I have a breakdown, and I'm very clear that is not a legal document. That was me interpreting the decision and summarizing it for you guys. And it was good enough to get a passing grade in my law class, educational law class. So, but I did not go to law school specifically for a reason. So don't think you're getting a real legal brief out of me. Um, Andrew F. is not actually a twice exceptional student. However, one of the big decisions that came out of the out of the Andrew F. case was, well, one piece was prior to Andrew F., we had a rule of de minimis, like progress for a student was described as anything other than nothing. And when we're talking, especially in terms of special education, anything other than nothing is not very promising. Um, it's really hard, I think, as any teacher to think that as long as you did something more than nothing, it's almost like the 50% rule, right? As long as I turned something in, I get at least a 50%. That was sort of the special education rule. As long as you got an education that wasn't nothing, then you were considered to be making progress. With Andrew F., they didn't change the definition to say this is what progress looks like, but what they did say was progress in light of circumstance. And the reason that's really important, especially for twice exceptional learners, is that their circumstances are so different from each other, different from peers, different from gifted learners, that we really have to look and say, where is it that they are struggling, that we are focusing our instruction on for specialized instruction? It takes us away from having to be, traditionally we might say a student has to be 2 or more years behind in order to qualify for an IEP. But if we talk about progress in light of circumstance, what we're saying is the student is here. They should be here for whatever the area of disability is, and they need to make progress towards that area. And I think that's really important because of the needs that it addresses with us and specifically with our twice exceptional students. The other piece that came out was I think it was so important that they didn't specifically say what does progress look like, but I think that was something that was important for us, that we wanted, sorry, progress in light of circumstance. Yes. So essentially what it's saying is we should look at our students and we should, when we estimate what progress they should make within a year, because that's what we measure in special education specifically, that progress should not be based on what is the minimum amount they can do in that year, but it should be saying based on this child, their abilities, their needs, their strengths, their deficits, how far can they go? And then we need to set our goals and measure progress based on how far they can go given all those circumstances, and not just saying what's the minimum that they could do. And in my head, it's like, I'm not saying, and this is me speaking, this is not legality, it's not saying every kid gets an A. It's saying that if I'm satisfied with a D as progress and I only set my goal for my student to make a D, technically prior to this, the law was happy with a D. I'm not saying all of my kids need to make A's, but if I have the expectation that they can make an A and I try and help them progress to that A, they're making more than minimal progress. So even if they don't get all the way to the end of the goal that I'm looking at, they're still making more than just that minimum amount of progress. And goals that are never set with grades. I'm just using that as an example. I talk a lot in allusions and metaphors. I use a lot of metaphors and similes when I talk. For better or for worse, I taught English. That's how I roll. So I'm going to go get a glass of water because my voice is giving out. I don't know if y'all can tell that. So it is 9:50. No, it's not 9:59. Try that again. It is 7:59. 8:10. Does that work for everybody? Awesome. Then I'm going to go ahead and pause my recording. Okay, so one thing I said before the break that I was going to do was I was going to pull up this article I had written, essay I had written about, it's called My Journey from 2E Student to 2E Advocate. I received an award from our national organization and they made me write an essay because apparently that's your punishment for winning an award. So I'm going to read this. I did not cry the last time I read it, and I'm pretty proud of myself, so that's the goal this time. But if I do, I'm going to turn off the camera, blow my nose, and then continue on. Yeah, so this is called Coming from Full Circle, my journey from 2E student to 2E advocate. You are so smart, Sarah, my second grade teacher told me, but you can't learn because you have a problem. But the good news is there's a magic pill that can let you learn. You should talk to your parents. My problem? I had ADHD. I had ADHD in the mid 80s when it was diagnosis du jour and everyone was taking Ritalin. My parents knew I was special. They had me tested, but they also decided that the medication wasn't right for me. My teacher was mad that my parents wouldn't give me the magic pill, and I spent most of the rest of the year sitting in the hallway or the closet because I was a behavior problem. I'm still a behavior problem, just so we're clear. There was never any discussion about other supports or resources that might be available. No one mentioned gifted with disabilities. And certainly no one ever thought that perhaps all the problems I was causing in the classroom were due to boredom and that I had way too much time on my hands. All of my behaviors were attributed to this disease that my parents wouldn't treat. In fact, by the end of third grade, my teachers refused to recommend me for the gifted program because of my behavior issues. Ironically, had they recommended me for the gifted program, I would have ended up at the only school that actually had a GTLD program in 1987. Without the support of most of our local school system, we navigated the next 14 years as best we could. Looking back, I can see how my access to assistive technology, scribes, mindfulness strategies, and strength-based learning practices helped me keep my head above water, but just barely. Most of these supports also came from my blessed and saintly mother, who at this point has been my primary support through K-12, undergrad, and 3 master's programs, and a career in education. Yes, there's a really good chance that some of the IEPs I write that are completed on time are courtesy because of my support system. And now, at the time, it's 2022, and I can reflect on all that we in education have learned in the 2 decades since my K-12 experience ended. Even in the last 5 years, our understanding of giftedness, disabilities, and of course the intersection of where those exceptionalities manifest in people with these complex lives and complex brains. But what have we done for individual students? Although we've made great gains in research, it often feels like we've made little progress on impacting the lives of actual twice exceptional students in public schools. We hear stories every day of students who can't get into gifted programs because of limited special education resources, or a child who doesn't receive an IEP because their cognitive scores are too high. Or even on the occasion where the stars align and the gifted child can get an IEP, they struggle to receive services because how do I write a goal for a child who's already above grade level? I am fortunate to work in one of the few public school systems that offer direct services for 2E students as part of a continuum of services from both our special education and our accelerated and enriched instruction programs. On the special education side, we have direct services for students in grades 3 through 12, where students who require specially designed instruction in order to access their advanced courses can receive these services through a cohort model. Beyond these services, we also offer consultative services to special and general education teachers, which involves working with school teams to build their capacity in order to serve 2E students in their home schools. We also have these same services available to teachers and special educators in our schools with advanced learning programs so that those who teach advanced learners on a daily basis learn how to plan and program for these students. On the accelerated and enriched curriculum side, we highlight best practices for 2E and emergent multilingual learners, EMLs, as part of our standard professional development. Interestingly, my position as the 2E instructional specialist is actually housed in our curriculum office as a part of the accelerated and enriched instruction unit. Not only does this create a unique partnership between the curriculum and special education offices, which allow us to deliver a wide range of services for 2E students who are both inside and outside of general education, but it also sends a powerful message across our system. Our message is that our students are gifted students who face a unique set of challenges, but they are still entitled to receive challenging curriculum that plays to their strengths while we teach strategies to mitigate or remediate their areas of weakness. As most people in central office will say, I miss the kids and I miss the direct impact I had on their lives on a daily basis. However, I do know that through my work, I am able to make a difference in the lives of thousands of 2E students, those who are identified and those who are struggling without understanding. I find joy in the growth I've seen from my central colleagues who've expanded their understanding of 2E. These colleagues now stand with me as advocates for 2E students. We have special education specialists coaching special education teachers in how to support advanced curriculum. We have AEI specialists coaching gifted classroom teachers on their role in supporting, adapting, and modifying for 2E students. I'm also inspired by the feedback from the classroom teachers when I'm providing consults. It's rare that I have to explain that 2E is a thing. Generally, when I'm called for consults, it's for specific or nuanced cases. Educators who complete our PD courses will say how important the learning is and how they can reflect on the number of 2E likely students they have had and how this learning has changed their thinking. More recently, we've received a number of requests for deeper learning where educators are asking us to instruct them beyond the basics of a course in recognizing and serving 2E learners. They're asking us what's next. This is a major reason I do the work I do. Even though I know I won't see the faces of most of the students who benefit from the work, I know they're finding success because of it. Because of the work, we have more people at more levels in the system talking about 2E, 3E, and other special populations in gifted education and asking, what are we doing about this? And because of the work, we are no longer soulless in a cacophony of needs. Rather, we have a large and growing choir of voices advocating for our 2E students. But ultimately, I do the work for my 7-year-old self in second grade. No, I'm going to cry. Or for Sarah, the kindergartner, who was told she didn't belong because 4-year-olds can't possibly read, and then got sent to the closet because I picked up a book and read it to her. Or third grade Sarah, or sixth grade Sarah, or college freshman Sarah, who got kicked out of the biology lab and almost out of undergrad on the second day of class. Because while I love the work that I do and the students who grow because of that work every day, I fight for the little girl who endured so much from an education system that didn't understand her. And I owe it to her to make sure that her suffering was not in vain. I tried. I almost made it. But part of the reason that I read that is not just because of me. I think it's really important for teachers to understand that I reflect on my experiences in elementary school. I am over 40 years old, and this still affects me on a very regular basis. This year's been especially tough because my daughter's in second grade, and I am so lucky that we have a teacher who heard my concerns and has met me and said, this is what I'm doing for her. Because she was part of one of my classes where she heard the story, and I can't imagine what it's like to have to be the second grade teacher for my child, knowing that this was my background. But I came through one of the presentations I did about this, and somebody said something to me about trauma, and I'm like, I don't have trauma. Like I'm here, I'm doing my thing. And then somebody else pointed out if you can still cry about something that happened in second grade that affects your life on a daily basis, that's probably a form of trauma. And I think it's important for all of us who are teachers to remember that things that we do on a daily basis impact our kids for a really long time. Um, I have friends who are friends with this teacher on Facebook. Her name pops up on my thing every so often, and I feel sick every time I see her name. On the other hand, if she hadn't done this, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be talking to you, and I wouldn't be supporting all the kids I do. So, there's a flip side to that as well. But my experience is mine, but it's not unique. And for the number of kids who I work with, who I stay in touch with over the years, who can reflect back on very similar stories where people didn't understand them and told them that they were this, that, or the other. I even had a very friendly conversation with a parent today who said that, she just thought the idea of advancing children was terrible, and she was so happy her child was the oldest in the class instead of the youngest. And I was like, yeah, but I was the youngest in the class, and I would have been happy to move forward a couple of grade levels because I'm like the kids my age anyway. I am a behavior problem also. Let's be honest. If you've met me for 5 seconds, you probably have figured that part out. Um, it took me a long time to learn how to control some of those emotions that I feel. I really mean it. I almost got kicked out of undergrad because I couldn't keep my mouth shut and because I made a lot of sarcastic comments and somehow the dean found out. And the next thing I knew, luckily, I was 17 when I went to college. And so they couldn't do a whole lot without my parents there. So luckily, my mom, bless my mother, came down and was like, let me tell you about Sarah. Um, Not a conversation that every college will listen to. Um, I did not start taking any medication for my ADHD until I was 28. And I will tell you the first time, and I'm not even on the medication I took at the time, but right after I took it, I took the praxis, the history praxis. And it was the first time in my life I went through a test. I marked along the way, like I wasn't sure about an answer, and I marked it. And then at the end of the test, I only went back to the ones I marked. And I didn't change every single answer on the way. And I didn't second and third and 10th guess myself on questions. And when I was done, I put the pencil down and I closed the book and I didn't touch it. And it was the highest score I'd ever gotten on a standardized test. And it's not because the medicine made me smarter, it's because it made me focus, it made me calm down, and it made me be able to say, that's okay. I think I got the answer right. And I wasn't so full of like a random nervous energy that I felt like if I wasn't working the whole time, I wasn't doing what I needed to do. Um, and that it really, really impacted me. Um, I didn't change my dosing again or really start taking anything again until the pandemic when I had been up for almost 3 weeks straight and I had slept maybe 90 minutes or so a day. And I said something to my psychiatrist about, because that's your medical doctor, about it sort of felt like the wheel was going, but the hamster was dead. But yet somehow the wheel was still going. And she's like, I think your hamster needs a nap. And so we tried me on a new medication and again, I slept for the first time in like for a full night about a week after I started taking the medication. It didn't make me different or smarter or anything else, but it gave me another tool in my toolbox to work my way through what I needed to work through. Um, and it's been a really interesting. And so, when I was younger, I was dead set against medication a lot because of the experience I had when I was in second grade with my teacher literally telling me about the magic pill. Um, and it became such a thing for me and such a point to not medicate that I often think back to like how different could so many other situations have been if we hadn't had such a negative experience. At the same time, there's a lot of development that I think happened differently. We know that, frontal lobe development doesn't really finish until a person's 25. People with ADHD, it's closer to 27. I feel like I can tell you the day that my frontal lobe decided it was going to work, and that was around probably 28, right? I think probably the day I decided to actually take the medicine because I was so scared. I was crying. I called a friend and I'm like, I can't swallow this pill. And she's like, it's not going to change who you are, but it's going to slow you down just a little bit. And that was enough to get me to take the pill. And I was terrified. And then I woke up the next day and I was terrified, but I didn't really remember why I was terrified. And it slowed down a lot of things for me. Um, Ultimately, that was not a good medication. If you want to hear some crazy stories about what the medication did to me, I love telling those stories, but not now. Um, but again, it's all part of that experience, and it also to me is part of that lifelong twice exceptional piece. Our students who are experiencing these things when they are in second grade or kindergarten or 12th grade, they're going to continue to experience this and have these issues for the rest of their lives because it's not about the academics and it's not about the label. It's about living your everyday life and being able to keep the hamster alive, but also let the hamster take a nap sometimes. And it's about being able to be frustrated with something and not, oh, what's a good one? Oh, tear up your house. Like when I get frustrated, I had to work really hard and it's not great. Last week I got really mad. I couldn't find something and I turned over like 3 boxes that I had just packed in my living room and the living room's still not cleaned up. That's part of the twice exceptional self-regulation piece. And I had to apologize to my family and my daughter and work on cleaning it up some. But it's part of who I am and it's always going to be there. And I can deal with it now because I know what it is. But even in the moment, sometimes it's really hard to recognize what's going on. And I do remember looking at one of those boxes going, this is just your inability to self-regulate. And I then said, I was, yes, talking to myself, and I was like, yeah, but it's gonna make you feel a lot better if you flip this box over. And you know what? It did. I felt a lot better if I flipped the box over. And I felt terrible for the next week because I gotta clean up the box. But it's all a part of what these are. And if we shift about that and we look back to, the experience that a lot of our students are having, sometimes you got to just flip the box over or flip the desk over. Or I flipped desks when I was in school. That was my favorite activity. Did you know there's a great way? Like I got really good at figuring out where to put your finger on the lip of the desk to get the best flip going. Again, was I causing problems? 100%. But God, was I bored? What else was I going to do with my time? Um, I always believe that we have to listen to our kids, especially our twice exceptional kids, when they tell us they're bored, because it's one of the ways that they're also telling us that they're not engaged, they're not listening, they're not paying attention. It's a form of self-advocacy, um, and we need to listen to them. It doesn't necessarily mean that the work itself is boring. It means that they are bored with their engagement and they need help re-engaging with their task. It might be that it's too easy, or it might be that it's too hard, but they're going to use that word bored to communicate with it, especially when they're younger. And if they're bored, like I said, whether or not it's because the material is too hard, if they're bored, they will find something else to do with their time. And we're not going to like what they do most of the time. Um, it's also very similar in our students with um, strong leadership skills. Our twice exceptional students who have strong leadership skills do not always use those strong leadership skills for positive leadership. They are the ones who are really good at getting their classmates, and it's not necessarily being manipulative, sometimes it is, but it's using that skill as a leader to get other kids to do things in order to amuse the kid who's bored. So giving them, stronger roles in the classroom, giving them things to do, giving them a way to find positive leadership with those skills is one way that you can help draw them back into the classroom and draw them into um, things that they're doing. I absolutely will. And actually, I am that is part of what our seventh session, I think, is working with parents. That's one of the tiles that I said I haven't cleaned up yet, but that is one of our, I think, our session 7. But I'm also working on getting us a guest speaker for that one. Who she's, I don't know what her title is right now, but she's the dean of academics, basically at the only twice exceptional school in college, twice exceptional graduate school in the country. Um, and her area of focus and research is talking to parents. So I'm going to see if I can get her to be one of our guest speakers. And if not, I'm going to try and grab Ashley Carpenter from William and Mary, who is both the head of professional learning for William and Mary, but also a twice exceptional parent and a twice exceptional person. And she's also a great speaker to have about other ways to um, talk to families, talk to parents, and kind of work through that process. And part of the reason I do that is I do know a lot of that, but I also feel like you guys don't need to actually listen to 14 hours of my voice. And so I try and bring in those guest speakers to work with us. Um, and I said I also share other learning opportunities. There's an online conference at the end of February. Um, it's called the William and Mary Twice Exceptional Conference, and we're in our 4th year. Um, Ashley Carpenter runs the conference, and the other person who I'm hoping to ask to speak is presenting at that conference. But there are a lot. This year's theme is really, really focusing a lot on executive functioning, and then there's also some on self-regulation. Seems to be a big area of focus this year. So if those are areas of interest to you, let me know. And I can definitely point you in the direction of the conference. Um, but that also, like I said, like I learn a lot of these things because I am passionate about it, but I also live it. And having that community to express and share things with makes things a lot easier, just kind of living that life. Um, and yeah, parents, you've got some parents, like I said, who really get into this, like their child's twice exceptional. I think if I had $1 for every time a parent tested their child, I read the report and it was kind of like reading about myself. So I decided to go get myself tested. I I'd be speaking to you guys for free because I wouldn't need to work. But because let's be honest, I'm never going to quit working even if I am a millionaire because I like doing this. I just, but again, like twice exceptional apples do not fall far from twice exceptional trees. It is, I would say, pretty rare that we have twice exceptional kids who don't have at least one twice exceptional parent, whether or not they accept that. And that sometimes is where that barrier is that what we're talking to the parents about are things they know about themselves, and they start to feel very in their feelings about, well, are you telling me I'm wrong? Are you telling me my parents raised me wrong? It's like, no, we're telling you that there's been a lot of research in the last 20 years and things have really changed and the landscape has changed. And our understanding of giftedness and choice exceptionality and the brain has changed. And we're just giving you new information. And like I said, and then you have the parents who like twice exceptional is their world. And a lot of my friends who have gone through and gotten like PhDs and EDDs in twice exceptionality are doing it because they spent so much time researching for their own children and then their kids graduated and they're like, what do I do with all this information? They went and got PhDs and EDDs in twice exceptionality because they had done so much work around the topic. Um, and both of those parents present an interesting challenge because sometimes our overeducated parents, I want to say they know too much, but sometimes their knowledge is so broad, it's hard to bring them back down to their child and say, all of that is true, but not necessarily about your child. And then, like, so the flip side of that is, trying to say, parents, we want to try something different, or maybe you should speak to the pediatrician because we know a lot more. And it's not that we're saying go take the magic pill, but rather there are social skills groups, there are communities, there's a whole new world around using gaming and specifically tabletop gaming in order to drive social skills and teach social skills. There's a couple of classes in our area that do it. D&D is what, like, I kind of joke, kids who play D&D are probably twice exceptional. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's every single one of my twice exceptional schools has a D&D club, and you can guess who's the president of it. Um, it doesn't matter. It's always one of my kids. Um, it's just it's again, it's a part of helping them navigate. And actually, I think D&D is an excellent example to teach or to explain how with twice exceptionality rules only matter when they matter. Um, when we think about something like D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, it is a highly involved game. There's a lot of imagination, a lot of creativity, a lot of role play. But there's also a lot of rules. And when you think of twice exceptional kids, rules are not usually something you think of. Like our kids don't follow rules. They don't like rules. And then you get into something like D&D and there's books of rules. And it's like, how do our kids remember all of these interplay and all of these things, but they can't remember to like put their homework in the homework bin? And it comes back to that idea of importance. And they're not going to learn something unless it's relevant to them. They like their game. The rules are relevant to their game. The game doesn't go as well if you don't know the rules. And so they learn the rules and they learn them intimately and they apply them and they argue about them and it brings all of those skills they have together. Putting homework in the homework bin has no meaning to them. Like, why? If they even did the homework, like, let's just pretend they did their homework for a second. Like, I did my homework. Why do you need it in the bin? If you really want it, you can come get it from me. Or, oh, yeah, I did it, but I forgot it because it just wasn't meaningful to me to put it into the bin. Helping them find meaning in things that are not meaningful will help build some of those skills and help build some of those um, pieces that they're missing. But if they don't have a sense of why it's important, they're not going to do it. That's pretty much a blanket statement, but it's also pretty much, I think, a true statement for the vast majority of our kids. The other side of them that you sometimes otherwise would have would be our rule following students. But again, our rule following students don't necessarily mean that they follow the rules. It means that they police the rules for everybody else. So they are very well acquainted with the rules. They just lack the understanding that those rules apply to them as well sometimes. Um, and having things like a heightened sense of justice is also um, part of the spectrum of twice exceptionality. And actually, we could talk about that next, I think. Let's go talk about Scott. Yeah, I'll talk about Scott first. So, like I said, I like to tell stories and I like to use a lot of examples of people who help us to help us understand what this world of twice exceptionality looks like. And the quote I read in the beginning was from Scott Barry Kaufman, who had recently published a book on twice exceptionality. Um, Scott Barry Kaufman has a PhD from Yale, Harvard, Carnegie Mellon. I know he's a Carnegie Mellon at some point. The man is utterly brilliant. And one of the clips I have you guys as a possibility is to hear about his new theory of human intelligence. And literally that's what the man does is he's thinking out new ways to define what is intelligence in people. Um, Scott Scott went to school at a time where you had to have certain cognitive scores in order to take AP classes. Scott um, scored so low on cognitive tests that he was in special education classes, but he was not even in grade level classes. At some point, I think they told him he would never learn to read. Um, I very specifically remember, and he worked and worked and worked because he's just not a person who does well on tests. And he also has, I believe it's an auditory processing disorder. And so telling him and saying things to him, he has a massive vocabulary. He has all these great ideas, but him being able to hear what you're saying to him, process what you're saying to him, and then react to what you told him to do is like non-existent. Um, and so when he was a child, and we don't know a lot about this back in those days, he was put into mostly remedial classes. When he did work his way up through high school, he wanted to take AP classes, and his teacher's like, "Yeah, that's awesome, that's great." And then they looked at his cognitive scores and they said, "Oh, you're not allowed to take these classes because you don't have the cognitive scores to take them." That is illegal, by the way. Now, wasn't at the time, but it is now. Um, so Scott ended up studying himself. He took the AP tests because you don't actually have to take the class to take the test. He took the test, he got the scores, um, and then he applied to college. And he applied to Carnegie Mellon because that's where he wanted to go. And he did not qualify for any other programs except operatic studies. And he is actually an amazing singer. And he sang for them and he got accepted for their opera department. And he went to Carnegie Mellon with an opera scholarship. And then once he got there, he switched to psychology. And once you're in the door, like a lot of things, once you're in the door, you can do as you please. I do believe he actually did get a degree in opera, but he also got a degree in psychology and a master's in psychology and a PhD in psychology. And he is one of those people who is like, his thoughts are beyond what normal people grasp. Like, I don't understand half of what he talks about. I just sit there and smile and nod a whole lot. Um, but all of that really is to say, when we talk about things like access and we talk about the work that we're doing, scores are important, but they're not everything. And I think his story is definitely an awesome example of all the things that could have gone wrong. And can we also make an argument that he is a white male and that probably gave him a leg up that a lot of others wouldn't have? Absolutely. I think if you ask Scott, he would probably agree with that statement. Um, because for every story we hear about Scott, we have to think about all the stories we don't hear about other students. Dr. Sean Robinson, we'll talk more about him when we get to our diversity unit because he's another amazing example. He graduated, that's right, he graduated high school not being able to read. I believe he was in college or heading kind of that age before he was diagnosed with dyslexia. And he went back, he learned, he ended up, I believe, getting a GED, and eventually he did finish his PhD. And he will tell you it took him as many years to finish his PhD as most people take to finish their K-12 experience. But he focuses on giftedness and dyslexia in African American males because that's his story and it speaks to him. There's actually a really great series. It's called Dr. Dyslexia Dude, and it is about a young African American boy who finds his superpower, and he meets Dr. Dyslexia Dude, who's the superhero who teaches him all about who he is as a learner. Um, and when we hear stories um, like Dr. Robinson and Dr. Kaufman, And then we think back to the same like stories, you know, the commonalities of their test scores were low, people limited them based on their test scores. That is something that our approach, especially within MCPS, is yes, we look at the scores, but we also look at readiness, we look at interests, and we also want to remember when our kids are acting out sometimes or showing these behaviors, we don't want to just focus on that behavior and like fixing the behavior. We want to look more at that root and see what is it that we can do to bring them back in. Because what we don't want to happen is to have more of our students who have profiles like Dr. Coffin or Dr. Robinson lose that and end up not being able to show what it is that they are capable of doing. So that ended on a really flat note. I didn't want it to, but it did. Um, yeah, and there's a lot. I actually might try and get somebody else to come talk. The person who just retired as the gifted director for the state of Maryland is another person, Dr. Regal, who was told he was never going to go to college because his learning disabilities were so severe. And again, yes, he has his doctorate and he is now, starting in March, I think, will be the president of CEC TAG, which is the it's the gifted subgroup of the Council for Exceptional Children, which is another national organization. And Gifted and Twice Exceptional falls under CEC TAG, and he will be our president next year. But he also spent the last, I think, 10 years running gifted education in Maryland. And yet he was another person who was told he was never going to go to college. He was lucky to graduate from high school, um, and all because of test scores that they all experienced yet at a young age. And yeah, that was a really flat note. I want to pick that up a little bit. Not usually such a downer in the first class. Um, so we take that part. So I think I have one more reading I want to do, and I will post this in the class. Um, so many tabs. So I'm gonna do this reading, and my gosh, I have a GIF on this page, and it is making me nauseous, and I need to like make it stop. The title, the work is called "Is a Cheetah," and the little GIF of a cheetah is running, and it's making me a little nauseous. But yeah, I want to read this to you. I'm not going to read the entire thing because it's like 6 pages long, and I don't have that kind of attention span. Um, but yeah, it was written in 1996. I understand how long ago that was. I would assume there's people on this call who weren't born then, but that's okay. I still think it's really relevant. Um, so yeah, I'm just going to read this. It's a tough time to raise, teach, or be a highly gifted child. That was 1996, but it's still true. As the term gifted and the unusual intellectual capacity to which that term refers becomes more and more politically incorrect, the educational establishment changes terminology and focus. Giftedness, a global integrative mental capacity, may be dismissed and replaced by the fragmented talents, which seem less threatening and theoretically easier for schools to deal with. Instead of an internal developmental reality that affects every aspect of a child's life, intellectual talent is more and more perceived as synonymous and limited to academic achievement. The child who does well in school, gets good grades, wins awards, and performs beyond the norms for his or her age is considered talented. The child who does not, no matter what innate intellectual capacities or developmental level, is less and less likely to be identified and less likely to be served. A cheetah metaphor can help us see the problem with achievement-oriented thinking. The cheetah is the fastest animal on Earth. When we think of cheetahs, we are likely to think first of their speed. It's flashy, it's impressive, it's unique, and it makes identification incredibly easy. Since cheetahs are the only animals that can run 70 miles per hour, if you clock an animal running 70 miles per hour, it's a cheetah. But cheetahs are not always running. In fact, they are able to maintain top speed for only a limited time, after which they need a considerable period of rest. It's not difficult to identify a cheetah that isn't running, provided we know what other characteristics to look for. It's gold with black spots like a leopard, but it also has a unique black tear marks beneath its eyes. Its head is small, its body is lean, its legs unusually long, all bodily characteristics critical to a runner. And the cheetah is the only member of the cat family that has non-retractable claws. Other cats retract their claws to keep them sharp, like carving knives kept in a sheath. The cheetah's claws are not designed for cutting, but for traction. This is an animal biologically designed to run. Its chief food is antelope, itself a prodigious runner. The antelope is not large or heavy, so the cheetah does not need the strength or bulk to overpower it, only speed. On the open plains of its natural habitat, the cheetah is capable of catching an antelope simply by running it down. While body design in nature is utilitarian, it also creates powerful internal drive. The cheetah needs to run. Despite design and need, however, certain conditions are necessary if it is to attain its famous 70-mile-per-hour top speed. It must be fully grown, it must be healthy, fit, and rested. It must have plenty of room to run. Besides that, it's best motivated to run all out when it's hungry and there are antelope to chase. If a cheetah is confined to a 10 by 12-foot cage, though it may pace or fling itself against the bars in restless frustration, it won't run 70 miles per hour. Is it still a cheetah? If a cheetah only has 20-mile-per-hour rabbits to chase for food, it won't run 70 miles per hour while hunting. If it did, it would flash past its prey and go hungry. Though it might run well on its own for exercise, recreation, or fulfillment of internal drive, when it's given only rabbits to eat, and the hunting cheetah will only run fast enough to catch a rabbit. Is it still a cheetah? If a cheetah is fed zoo chow, it may not run at all. Is it still a cheetah? If a cheetah is sick or its legs are broken, it won't even walk. Is it still a cheetah? And finally, if a cheetah is only 6 weeks old, it can't run 70 miles per hour. Is it then only a potential cheetah? A school system that defines giftedness or talent as behavior, achievement, and performance is compromised in its ability to recognize highly gifted students and give them what they need as a zoo to recognize what provide for cheat. Wow, I'm going to try that one again. A school system that defines giftedness or talent as behavior, achievement, and performance is as compromised in its ability to recognize highly gifted students and give them what they need as a zoo is if they only recognize cheetahs by looking for speed. When a cheetah doesn't run 70 miles per hour, it isn't particularly achieving cheetah, though it's doing what no other cat can do, it's behaving normally for a cheetah. To lions, tigers, leopards, any other big cat, the cheetah's biological attributes are deformities. Far from the best cat, the cheetah seems barely a cat at all. It's not heavy enough to bring down a wildebeest. Its non-retractable claws can't be kept sharp enough to tear through a thick hide. Given the cheetah's tendency to activity, cats spend most of their time sleeping in the sun, might label the cheetah as hyperactive. Like cheetahs, highly gifted children can be easy to identify. If the child teaches themselves to read Greek at the age of 5, or reads at an 8th grade level at the age of 6, or does algebra in 2nd grade, we can safely assume the child is highly gifted. Though the world may see these activities as achievements, they're not achieving as a child so much as a child operating normally according to their own biological design, innate mental capacity. Such a child has been given room to run and something to run for. She's healthy and fit and has not had her capacities crippled. It doesn't take great knowledge about characteristics of a highly gifted children to recognize this child. However, most schools are to extraordinarily intelligent children what zoos are to cheetahs. Many schools provide a 10 by 12-foot cage, giving the unusual mind no room to speed up. Many highly gifted children sit in classrooms the way big cats sit in cages, dull-eyed and silent. Some may be unable to resist the urge from the inside, even though they can't exercise. They pace, they lash out, they snarl at their keepers, or they throw themselves against the bars until they do themselves damage. Even in open and enlightened schools that are likely to create an environment for cheetah enclosures, they also allow for moderate running, but no room for a growing cheetah to develop necessary muscles and stamina to become a 70 mile per hour runner. Children in cages or enclosures, no matter how bright, are unlikely to appear highly gifted. Keeping from exercising their minds too long, these children may never be able to reach high levels of mental functioning that they were designed to. it's going to go from there. And then also we'll talk about how the metaphor completely breaks down. Um, and I do think something that is interesting from one of my Twice Exceptional case managers when we first read this together was he expressed the concern that cheetahs are highly specialized to the point that they're going extinct. We also don't want to highly specialize things too much that our children can't thrive in anything but the perfect environment. And I think that that's a great lesson to take out of, um, we get the point that the author is making, but I think it's also important to understand the flip side of it as well. But overall, what I really also like about our cheetah definition is even though the author is talking about highly gifted children, to me, what they're really talking about even more is our twice exceptional children, children who have these amazing abilities, but also these amazing disabilities or detriments. Like we said, that when you look at them compared to the other big cats, they might be considered hyperactive. They might consider that their tools aren't quite right when they have what the room that they need to grow and to show what they can do. But by typical measures, you're not really going to see who they are. And so as we work our way through the course, I like coming back in my own mind to the cheetah metaphor of what are we doing to create an environment for our students so that they are able to thrive, but also how are we keeping them from needing something that is so specialized that they can't function in a typical world? Because at the end of the day, we are all going to end up in a pretty typical world. And so we need the tools that we need in order to be successful in this typical world. And so over our next couple of weeks and um, over the readings that we have offline, that is kind of going to be our frame for our course is what can we do to make our environment workable for our twice exceptional students, but not so specialized that they can't succeed in any other environment. Um, that's what I've got for tonight. Um, just any other housekeeping things to share? I did look back. A couple people asked, I shared the classes that we're not having, so we're not meeting. Basically, if we're not coming to school, we're not having class because we deserve a break. Um, the only one that didn't match that pattern was March 4th. We are not having class on March 4th because I have an 8-hour training that I'm leading on March 4th, and then I have another 8-hour training I'm doing on March 5th. And as much as I like you guys, no. So March 4th is another day that we're not meeting, even though it's a Monday. Um, my goal is to have classes end. Obviously, if something weird happens, I have 1 week built in after spring break, but my goal is to end, or not spring break, after April, before Passover, whatever that is. My goal is to have our last lecture class on the 15th, and then you guys have until the end of April to finish whatever work you need to do. Um, if you're struggling with workload, if you're struggling with any other pieces, please reach out to me. I am first and foremost a special educator, and I'm always happy to do whatever accommodations people need. Um, I'm not the quickest at posting recordings, but I will post the recordings up on our Canvas course. And I do have the old recordings as well. So if you want to see what we talked about previously, you can do that as well. Um, I think I sort of said in the beginning, or maybe not, my modules are kind of designed like whatever the theme of the module is what we're going to talk about in class, but you won't be better or less prepared if you have or haven't done the module. It's just if you like to have information front loaded, do the module first. And if you like to listen, I like your sassy cat. Um, if you prefer to listen to what we talk about and then what we don't get to is what you want to look at in the module, if that works better for you, do that. If you want to save everything till spring break and spend your whole spring break doing twice exceptional, do that too. I am pretty flexible about that. Yeah, so the project. So if we go to, I'm very excited because I posted the project this time. Most of the time I forget to post it to like the third class. Okay, these are optional activities. So your final project is supposed to be something that brings together all of your learning in a way that makes sense for your job. So, for example, my gen ed teachers, I have something about talking about working your way through a lesson plan through a twice exceptional lens, whether you have a twice exceptional student or I can give you a profile. We have those options. My special ed teachers, um, we can basically go through sort of a consult process if you have a student that you want to talk about and write a reflection about or write an IEP for because you suddenly have them. That works really well for me. Or if you want to talk or write your way through, a different type of profile that you're interested in, again, whatever is working for you. Um, my school psychologists and counselors, usually what we end up doing is you will find some kid during the course of the next couple of months who meets a twice exceptional profile. And so usually what I end up doing is sitting down and doing like a really deep dive into your report and your testing results and going over what it is that you saw. For my special educators who are not working with twice exceptional kids, so I think I have people who are either SCB, LFI, in those settings. We'll talk about this a little more as we move through here. But I think what's important for you guys is to look at what we're calling more of a, like a relative choice exceptionality. So even in a setting like SCB, you will have your students who are higher and more able than other students might be. And so looking at how you are addressing outliers within your setting, I think is a really good way to look at it. I did a training once with Sandberg where we said, students who are at Sandberg are usually 2 or more years below academically, but even in terms of that, some kids are on grade level in math and they're 3 or 4 years below in reading. So how do we work with those relative differences within our own settings? Um, School administrators, I would love to have you focus on ideas around scheduling cluster grouping models, and I'm happy to provide resources and talk more about that. My central office people, it's usually just easier to set up an appointment and talk to me because your jobs are so broad, but usually we can find something pretty easy. Um, Not necessarily easy content wise, but easy within your job that you can use to focus. And then other things that if none of this sounds interesting to you and something else does, please let me know because again, I like providing choice. And really my goal is for you to absorb the information that we're sharing and make it applicable to something it is that you're doing in your life. If you are a twice exceptional parent and you want to do a write-up of your kid or things like that, I'm happy to work with that too. The other thing, if you're really interested, like I said early on, we are in the process of writing and rewriting our Twice Exceptional handbook. And so I had a couple teachers in previous sessions who didn't want to do anything with their classroom. They wanted a break. And so they actually took a different section of the handbook and did editing and went and found more modern research to support some of the pieces or refute pieces. So if you're more into writing, please let me know because I would love to have more help. It's, I think, 40 pages, 70 pages, something like that. And I am always happy to get more help around that. So, like I said, it's called the case study assignment, but you don't actually have to case study a student. Um, I just had to call it something when I was proposing it. But like I said, it is a very open-ended project. And if you still are kind of foggy about what it is you need to do, please use that link on the homepage and make an appointment with me, and we will sit down and chat through your circumstance and what you think makes sense to you. I'm happy to hear ideas. Oh, and yes, if you are really into anything like presenting or um, interested in conferences, I don't know, I love conferences. I love presenting at conferences. Um, there are some that are coming up over the summer and also into the fall. And people really want to hear from MCPS teachers because even if you're new to this, you're still just knowing that it exists puts you way far ahead of most school districts out there. And they really want to hear on how we do twice exceptional and how we do twice exceptional in our buildings and our classrooms. So if that becomes something interesting for you, let me know. Do assignments every week. You have discussion boards. Um, I don't grade them every week. I will read everybody's discussion board. The grades will trickle in as they go. But again, I need everything turned into me by April 29th. If you need more chunking and pacing than that, I am happy to help you pace yourself. Um, but each module should have, I think each module has 1 or 2 discussion boards. And for me, those are really your opportunity to reflect, to ask questions of each other. I will try to respond to things on the discussion board, but with 87 people in the class, I can't promise I'm going to get to everybody's discussion. I will read them all for sure. Um, and like I said, I don't, you know your schedule best. Families first. Like I said, I know I have to tell you you're only allowed to miss 1 class, um, and you're only allowed to make up 2 classes, but truly things happen in life and you need to put your families first and your jobs first. And as long as you watch when it's works for you, if you aren't able to attend class live, I can live with that. Um, and then, yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't expect you guys to turn in things weekly unless that's what works for you. Um, I find usually, especially with my spring class, that I tend to get waves. Like people are really good about now. And then, it's beginning of the quarter, they're on interims. I don't hear from anybody. And then spring break, I get a whole slew of things. Um, so, like I said, I'm probably too flexible, but I'm flexible because that's also kind of how I end up grading it as well. And also for me, grades are usually yes, you did it or no, you didn't. I'm not super picky when it comes. All my grades are 2 points, except the final project, which is 10 because I keep forgetting to change it to something else. Um, but everything basically is like, yeah, yes, you did or no, you didn't. And any other logistical questions I can answer? So last thing I always do is I will turn off